Hello. As the voice introduced me, my name is Edgar Capdeville. I'm the CEO of Nozomi Networks, and I'm here to talk about a very important topic. Specifically, it's called ethos. Ethos stands for Emerging Threat Open Sharing. So why do we need to talk about open sharing of emerging threats? It's actually pretty unique. Everybody knows about threat intelligence. We all exchange threat intelligence. Once you know that something is harmful, bad, recognizable, it's been determined and assessed to be malicious, sharing it is very common. We all do it. It's called threat intelligence. What we don't do, specifically in OT, but also very rare in IT, is sharing of emerging threats, things that we don't know yet that they're malicious. Something that has the probability of being malicious, or you have the suspicious that it is, but you don't know that it is. So how do we share that type of information? What is ethos? So we're going to talk a little bit about it. Ethos, first of all, it's a consortia. It is the output of a lot of historical events. First, it was the formation of the OT coalition. I don't know if you know, a lot of vendors in the detection space got together and formed the OT coalition. Then in the United States, CISA formed the JCDC, and a lot of members of the OT coalition were founding members of the JCDC. And eventually, a few of those vendors got together and formed Ethos. So Ethos is a consortia initially of vendors, but now accepting other folks. In addition to being a consortia, is a open source framework. So what we're developing here is available via open source. It's also a set of APIs. It's a set of APIs for a client and a server to communicate this information, this suspicious intelligence that has not yet been determined to be malicious. It's also OT-centric, and it's also open. It's supposed to be any vendor to any vendor. So we'll explain the dynamics in a second. So what it does, it correlates security events across end users or operators specifically, regardless of the solution that they use. So for example, you may be an energy facility in a particular country, and you may have chosen one of the detection tools out there. I represent Nozomi, so in this example, this particular energy operator may have implemented Nozomi Networks as their main asset visibility and detection solution. You may have another vendor that may have implemented a competing or a different platform. So the idea is that how do we take two things that exist in two different sites that have two different vendors, both vendors have detected, but they can't determine for sure if this behavior is malicious, right? And how do we share that information across? So this is what Ethos does. It actually is able to correlate that information, even though it comes from two different platforms. It is beneficial for everybody, right? Cybersecurity is a team sport. The issue is, once you've determined something is malicious, and it's already become assessed and productized as threat intelligence, then the game is a distribution game. How do I distribute this to the world? But the issue is, before you determine that something for sure is malicious, you only suspect it is, you actually need to collaborate. This is where the team sport comes into play. This is where if you detect something and I detect something, first of all, if it's not computer aided, you may not know if what you detected is the same. So using artificial intelligence to make sure that this behavior, this file hash, or this indicator of compromise is similar or similar enough to compare, needs to be done by machines, and how do you do that as a team sport? So this platform is beneficial for everybody who uses it, the two vendors being impacted and the community in general, because it's going to lead to the eventual assessment that something is either irrelevant or actually malicious, and then it can be part of the distribution game. It leverages crowdsourced information available in the community, as I said, suspicious activity, and is designed to reduce the timelines. So when it comes to threat intelligence, the biggest timeline is assessing whether something is malicious. Once you know it's malicious and it becomes threat intelligence, then it is a distribution game. But determining as a team that something needs to be assessed and studied and compared is where it takes the most time. So how does it happen? So again, potentially malicious events are detected by the different detection platforms, in this case, Nozomi or any one of the competitors in that space. Once it's detected, it's in real time shared, and it follows a client server. So again, I try to explain how this behaves. You have an Ethos client. The Ethos client lives in the detection platforms. So each one of the vendors that are members of the Ethos community has agreed to develop into the Ethos API. So something that you detect that you have not yet determined that is malicious, but is suspicious, is potentially malicious, can be shared to an Ethos server. And an Ethos server is the one that has machine learning techniques. Clustering algorithms is the initial spec to determine whether two things are similar. And once you have similarity between something that is determined to be suspicious in 1, 2, 3, 4 sites, then number one, as this slide says, it all happens in real time, no human intervention, and all the submitted information can be, again, file hashes, IP addresses that are suspicious, indicators of compromise, etc. So again, all this happens in real time, submitted from the clients to the server, and once it's in the server and the server has determined that, hey, there's a similarity across different users, then humans can actually do the research. This could be assessed and reviewed, compared. Eventually, this is extensible to be 100% automated or 100% machine determined. Today, it does require human assessment, and eventually the submitters and the submitters only are the ones that are notified that this has actually triggered a correlation across different sites. So again, the goal is to significantly reduce breach dwell time, to stop lateral movement. All the information that is shared is anonymized, and you get to choose what to send and what not to send, as any collaboration tool between different entities requires. Last but not least, and this is how a lot of people ask us, hey, how is this compared to Stix and Taxi? Are you creating yet another format or yet another standard? And again, not at all. As the next slide points out, Stix and Taxi are extremely useful and very widely used once you determine something is malicious. Stix is a formatting, it's basically the what, and Taxi basically is the distribution mechanism, right? So anything can be sent or received from a Taxi server. But Stix, Taxi, or MISP, which is more used in Europe, are amazing at doing their job. If you already determine that something is bad, malicious, Stix and Taxi do their job. But what happens before? This is where Ethos comes into play. It is a collaboration mechanism for, implementing that team sport philosophy for when it's needed the most. It's needed the most before something is malicious. Ethos, I mentioned already, was a consortia, a community. It basically has 3 groups. It was modeled, the governance was modeled after the Kubernetes governance. It has a committee group or a governance committee group, which guides the development of Ethos. It also has user groups, which articulates the different needs of the community. For example, you could have industry groups and so forth. And last but not least, you have project groups. And these are the project groups that go out and implement and work on behalf of the community, all of them coordinating with the committee group. Again, Ethos was born, the birth of the movement started with the OT Coalition. It migrated into CISA's JCDC for OT, and these are all the different members that have made the Ethos community today. You will notice that is, I think potentially is the first time, or at least in my opinion, one of the unique factors is this is the first time you have industry competitors. If you could argue that my day job is to go and get money away from these people and into my company, and their job is the same. So industry competitors got together to implement this, right? So it's not making any one of our companies better. It's making the whole community better. It enables our products to work better. It enables to for the good guys to win against the bad guys. So whenever you have folks that are natural competitors get together for a single purpose, something is good there. That's all I have for ethos. Thank you so much. Do I take questions now or later? Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Capdevielle, for your insightful sharing. Let us now invite on stage Mr. Lee for the second segment of the presentation. Mr. Lee is the Managing Director of Global Resilience Federation Asia Pacific. He manages the Operational Technology Information Sharing and Analysis Center, a community of trust for critical asset owners headquartered in Singapore and support organizations, both public and private, in Asia Pacific. He has more than 20 years of information security and ICT experience. Mr. Lee, please.
Thank you. I would say that AI has been doing a good job at AI. And there's two key takeaways that I get from Edgar's presentation. Industry for industry. I think that's something very heartening that we seldom see these days when competitors get together, OEMs or OT solution vendors. And the other one is emerging threats detection. Thank you. Meaning you typically you respond to threats after it happened, or when someone else have a breach, and then you get the information, the IOCs or the TTPs, and then you respond to the threat. So today I will talk about a community that was set up in the 1990s, so as part of the Presidential Decision Directive 63, and also the 2003 Homeland Security Presidential Directive 71, the ISEC was born in 1998. So the first ISEC was on financial services, and the mandate was that the public and private sectors would share information. And we are about 25 years, so we have many ISECs in the world today. So I'm going to talk about one ISEC, particularly OT ISEC, which stands for Operational Technology Information Sharing Analysis Center, that is headquartered here in Singapore. We were set up in October 2019 and part of the Singapore OT Cyber Security Master Plan. So I think this brings about some kind of a thought to share information back in 2019, where the CIIs will get together to share information. Now, one member's sharing of information would help the other members in the sense that if they are being attacked or there's indicators of compromise or a threat actor that is potentially targeting their sector. So by sharing information, they would help the other members to take precautions to prevent against the same attack, say ransomware. Ransomware is actually one of the main sources of attack tools that cyber criminals use. And you heard from the other talks that cybercrime is now potentially $10 billion. And cybercrime is one of the most lucrative weapon for cyber criminals to actually get their gains, criminal gains. So we are part of the Global Resilience Federation, where you can see all the ISECs there. So OT ISEC and all the other ISECs. I will not name the ISECs. You have manufacturing ISEC, water ISEC, oil and gas ISEC, energy analytics security exchange. So information sharing is one area where it's a low-hanging fruit by helping others, members, sharing information and the best practices that you see out there that you have. So imagine you have heard the OT cybersecurity expert panels over the course of the yesterday and today, and they've shared a lot of information, very valuable information, key takeaways that you can go and implement in your organizations. So we actually propose, advocate that sharing, besides sharing on threats and vulnerabilities. Sharing of best practices is one of the areas where we can help organizations, members, to be more cyber resilient, to be more organizational resilience. So these are the sectors where our members are in. The top 3 sectors are manufacturing, energy, and healthcare. But we do have members from other sectors like the transport, air, sea, and air, as well as government sectors and water sectors as well. So where we are right now, we have programs, other programs within OTCEP. So one of them is the new energy, transition to new energy, which we are launching in Q3 2003. So what is this community within OTCEP? It's basically looking at the renewable energy. So, the journey towards renewable energy, I think a lot of countries have been actually considering hydrogen or, things that doesn't impact the environment. Solar farms, in fact, electric vehicles charging. So all these need cybersecurity. And you heard from the speakers that you need to build a cybersecurity embedded within the products or the infrastructure. So security by design. So this is exactly what the relation to what Edgar mentioned, to actually look at emerging threats. So when you build the infrastructures, you are considering security baked in by design. So OTCEP provide member services. We have 2 portals. One is for strategic, where we share strategic information, cyber attacks or incidents, and also vulnerabilities. And the other is MISS, which is tactical. So which Edgar mentioned about the sharing of indicators of compromise and TTPs. So if you look at David Bianca's Pyramid of Pain, he was the one that actually came up with this Pyramid of Pain. So the low-hanging fruit is the indicators of compromise, where the hashes, the IP address, domain names, the host and network artifacts. So those are things that already happen, right? They are evidence. So what is more valuable to members would be the tools that the attackers use and the tactics, techniques, and procedures. And of course, based on research, the emerging threats before it happened. So using AI to actually look at where possible attacks can come from and where vulnerabilities can be exploited. So OTCEP is not just about sharing of threat information. So we do curate events for our members. We have threat calls, we have webinars, we have workshops, roundtables, and we also do threat modeling, training, tabletop exercises. So it's not just about passive receiving of threat information from the portal, but it's about what do you do with the threat information. So throughout our threat modeling, where we advise members on the areas where they can protect their infrastructure, or when we do threat modeling on a particular facilities, we look at the connection of the assets. So I think understanding the assets is important. So Dale spoke about the OT map, okay, the map where it's blank 70% of the time. So do you relate to that in your environment? Because OT is a big unknown, where what you don't know, you don't see. You don't see the threat because you do not know exactly how the assets are connected and how the data moves from one asset to another asset. So I think recognizing that there's a lack of visibility in the OT environment is the first step towards your defense against the cyber attacks. Because if we do not recognize that, then we are in a false sense of security. So we buy products from security vendors, our OEM and system integrator have actually implemented the systems. But how much trust can we have? So the amount of trust is until when you get hit by a cyber attack in the OT environment. Then there'll be a scrambling of lessons learned on how we can protect the assets. But isn't that too late? So in the Information Sharing Analysis Center, we are non-profit, so we curate the conversations with asset owners and operators. And of course, the other partners would be the OEMs and the system integrators and OT solution providers as the companies that are mentioned by Edgar. So we also produce threat landscape reports, ransomware reports. So all these information helps the members in increasing their risk posture, their resilience posture, and mitigating against the risks that potentially would happen, because it's basically unknown, right? So unless you get intelligence, so intelligence has been in use for the longest time by the military since Julius Caesar time, and also by business. So business also needs intelligence for their business decisions. So cyber also needs cyber threat intelligence in order to prevent the attacks. And I do resonate with some of the speakers. Some of the speakers says that cybersecurity should be by design, because it's basically when you run operations, you expect that the operations, the operations operate efficiently without any threats or without any weaknesses in the infrastructure. But that is not the case. As we know, there are numerous attacks happening. So these are the 4 quadrants of intelligence. Strategic intelligence, where it helps the management. Management won't look at the IOCs, but management knows exactly the type of threats that they face on a high level, like for their industry, what aspect that they need to look out for, because management look at the prioritization of the assets. And operational intelligence would be information about potential attacks. And of course, we talk about tactics, techniques, and procedures, which are the most valuable for the cyber defenders. Technical intelligence, like the indicators of compromise, where we can put inside our security systems, like the SIEM or IDS, IPS, to block against the attacks. So typically, threat information is not intelligence, still is contextualized. So it's collected, it's aggregated, and it's correlated, okay, among your sources. So the sources of threat intelligence can be internal, where you get logs from various systems that you have in your operating environment. Can be also from open source external information that you can actually bring in to have better contextualization of the information, so that you can come up with threat intelligence. And we use systems to do that contextualizations, and sometimes humans in the loop are important, because the analysts would actually use the tools to actually come up with some reports on the information to actually reduce the false positive. So through the process of aggregation, correlation, the objective is to look at the attack strategies by the threat actors to reduce the false positive alerts, so that we can work on prioritized alerts, meaning that out of these 100 alerts that we see, maybe 2 or 3 are more important, and we prioritize the protection or the response against these 2 or 3 threats instead of responding to 100 threats. So the threats dissemination is important, because intelligence needs to be actionable, and timeliness is important, because it needs to get to the people that are doing the defense against the cyber threats. Okay, so if you are late, and then it's no longer relevant, because the attackers may already be in your system. And typically, the attackers will come in, if you look at the cyber kill chain, they will reside in your system. So it's not a hit and run, but they do reconnaissance, then they, the action on, they will develop their tools, and then they will come in. So just like with Triton and Trisis, they were in the environment before they actually activate their attack. Threat intelligence can be used besides for protecting against your the security, using it in security operations. They can also be used for vulnerability management, incident response if the threat is already happening. So you want to contain the threat, and also risk management. The ISAC used the traffic light protocol, which is now in version 2, to share information. So all the sharing by the members are anonymized. So we have TLP rate. TLP rate means that the sharing is between 2 parties, and we cannot share outside of 2 parties. And TLP amber strict, you can share with the another party, and the party can share with members of their organization, but only members of their internal organization. TLP amber is where you share with a member, and the member can share with their internal organization and with their service providers that provide them a service, for example, managed security services. TLP Green is sharing within the OT ISAC community. And of course, TLP Clear is public information. The value of the ISAC is the sources of information. And that's why we connect with a lot of parties, third parties outside of our organizations. So of course, we do sharing between ISACs. Governments are important source, and the certs, the OEMs, OT security vendors like Nozomi, Clarity, Armis, and Tenable, and members, and also research institutions. Research institutions like the RI, where they research on various topics of cyber threat intelligence. Thank you, and I think I'm good on time.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. Let us now invite our moderator for the session, Mr. Teo Xiang Cheng, Vice President of Advisory at Ensign Info Security. Mr. Teo, over to you.
I'm very glad to introduce once again our speakers before me to join me on stage. We have Edgar, CEO Nozomi Networks, John, GRF Managing Director Asia Pacific, and last but not least, Marco, from Director for ICS Cybersecurity and Sector Lead at 1898N Company. So I welcome all the audience, both here in the ballroom, as well as those joining us virtually, to send in your questions. I think we will have Slido up shortly. And to give our two previous speakers some space, I will start the first question with Marco. Yeah. So Marco, having worked with several organizations myself, where they actually operate operational technology, one thing I've noticed is that even when they have cyber threat intelligence feeds, particularly, the engineers, the technicians actually lack the understanding, the capability to act on the advisories directly. They need to often be interpreted into tasks and specific actions for them to be able to take mitigating actions. So how can we make intelligence more meaningful for the engineers and the technicians who are at the front lines of addressing these threats when they surface? And I welcome the other panelists if you have additional comments and opinions to chime in as well. Marco?
Yeah, great. Thank you. That's a great question. So one of the key things there is making that intelligence information relevant, but also breaking it down to their understanding. So for me, coming from the asset owner perspective for many years, if security came to me and they said, hey, you've got a security issue, I'm going to say what unit, what area, what system, and when did it happen, and what triggered you to be able to make it this information? How do you know it's not a false positive? Because the last thing that anyone wants to do is just run out there and start making modifications, changes, shutting things down. That takes escalation even in the operations world. So to really answer your question correctly is getting that information is important, but making it formal to the actual engineer to be able to hone in exactly where, unit-wise, system-wise, and also provide them the timing. Like, when did you first see this? And how do you know it's not a false positive? That is a very important piece, because otherwise we're running a plant facility.
Yes.
Until you can tell me it's really tangible information, the last thing we want to do is shut stuff down. So.
Yeah. And in my observations, many of the engineers just want to be engineers. The technicians just want to be technicians. They are playing out their specialties, their professional capabilities to the maximum extent, right? Keeping the lights on, as you have highlighted.
Well, I think one of the key pieces there as well is that even the engineering perspective side and the maintenance folks, if it's tangible, we need to be able to take that information, because the last thing we want to do is then have to create more work for ourselves, rebuilding the system, trying to contain, isolate, but also rebuild. Because that takes time, effort, money, and it also will have impacts to the business itself financially. And so working together with IT security or OT security is important to get that information from tangible sources with good threat intel, and especially coming from multiple vendors, multiple sensors. We want to know it in the plant side, but we just need to make sure that it's relevant and timely.
And one particular observation that I have is then, how do we actually allow that bridge between the engineers in their technical capabilities to understand the cyber urgencies and the context that really comes from threat intelligence, or even very digested actions of mitigations that they need to actually take part in? Because sometimes they might say, I have my keep the light on activities that I need to do. Your mitigation probably come the last or the second last in the queue. So that's also an interesting thing to highlight. Maybe segue to John is then, what are some of the ways we can approach a tighter and more effective community to share intelligence and truly provide the early warning opportunities for community members?
Yeah.
And of course, Edgar, if you have additional.
Sanctions, before I answer that question on how to build a community, I think I have something to add to your first question about how do you actually share the information with the technical people, the engineers. And I think one of the things I learned from the conference, from the earlier session, is the preparation. I think preparation is key, where you have your asset maps, and I think all security decisions that are made needs to be documented. At least I learned that in the session, and the visibility about your current infrastructures, and also how do you set up the security, your processes, your security, your assets, and how are they connected, and how are they supported by the equipment, or and because security is just one aspect, it's not the problem, right? Of course, it's the problem that causes machines to go down, but of course we don't want machines to go down, so we need to understand how the machines are connected, the OT networks are connected, and also what potentially could go wrong. Where are the attack methods, or the attack paths where attackers can come in, and then we protect those parts of the network. So preparation is key, and I think this is something that OTCEP strives to do with the members in sharing information, because it's not passive sharing of information. So we work with experts like Marco, and then we take that information and contextualize it to the operating environment of the members, be it maritime, energy, or healthcare, because each of these environments are different. Of course, the baseline is the portal where it shares the strategic threat information, the cyber attack, and also the vulnerabilities and the technical indicators of compromise, the IOCs and TDP. So that is a baseline. But exactly how does it impact the members' organization? I think that contextualize needs to happen with a dialogue, and we always advocate members to understand their assets and how the assets are connected. So when we do threat modeling, correct me if I'm wrong, Marco, you have more extensive experience in this area than me, but when we do threat modeling, we are looking at the interconnected assets, and also the how the assets are impacting the other assets, meaning sending of information. Because in operational technology, one workstation sends, or one operation sends information to the next operation to start the work. So it passes the information, and also the products will move from one workstation to another workstation. I'm talking about manufacturing. And when it comes to maritime, they are mobile assets. When energy is a fixed assets, so the context is different. So we encourage that discussion through workshops, facilitated workshops, and RFI, where request for information, we can actually get that from the members, and we can send it to our partners, OEMs or vendors or government, and they will come back. And all this is anonymized, following the traffic light protocol. So members have no fear to ask information or to share information.
So I think, John, you've basically anchored the fact of how trust is established in such a community. And there's a deliberate registration process, so to speak, and you kind of know who is in the community, which is, interestingly, one of the questions that have come up. The question is, can threat actors actually misuse the information of such communities? And I think that registration process, ensuring that you know who are actually participants in such intel sharing communities, is actually one part of that. Maybe to extend further, my interest would then be how are some of the good practices that we've seen in trying to help the engineers bridge their understanding into cyber, and likewise for cyber professionals to bridge their understanding into the engineering space, and particularly the unique environments and operations that they run. If any panelists would want to take up that point. I think for John, mainly it could be your trainings that through OTCEP as well as GRF's initiatives. Maybe you could bring some light on those.
Yeah, I think besides training, I think getting the information, the surveys of the members are important because, and also talking to them. Communication is important. So the communication aspect is important because when you talk to engineers, they tell you something, but when you talk to the CISOs, they tell you some other thing. So you need to correlate the information to see what is the real issue at the members' site or the facilities or the plant. So I think that involves not just one level, but we talk to the management, the engineers, the operation management, and also the operators. So talking to them is very important. Going on site or in the facilitated workshop to try to bring up their concerns. Because if there's no concerns, we'll just be applying everything as a silver bullet. Okay, you get this threat intelligence and you follow these guidelines, CISA guidelines, you should be safe and secure.
From the vendor perspective, what I would say is when you approach a situation where everybody's going to have their own win and everybody's got their own goal,
yes,
it is usually challenging. People end up on different sides of the different sides. So from a vendor perspective, what we try to do is put folks on the same side. So you have operators, I have my things to do. You have IT folks in the cybersecurity. So we find common ground. We our goal from a company point of view is to implement a detection tool, but asset intelligence, for example, is a place where everybody agrees, right? Do we need asset intelligence? Do we need to know what our devices are? Absolutely. Cybersecurity, you can't protect what you can't see. Asset owners are tired of, driving on trucks with Excel sheets to remote reservoirs to do something that should have been done over the network, right? So we start the conversation with, let's create a tool that helps IT people be more OT versed, help OT people be more IT versed, and start with common goals. So, it sounds a little bit kumbaya, but that's the idea.
Yeah, I think you mentioned about asset intelligence. So the operations, the processes are also part of the asset. Do you agree? Yeah, because protecting that, because you mentioned, I think one of the speakers mentioned about the OSMA attack, right? The water facilities, about increasing the amount of lye in there. So understanding what is the process, so the operator is able to spot that because there is actually, it shows on the HMI that it's not normal, right? So I think training the operators is very important to understand. This cybersecurity is part of the operational process. So it's not just leaving it up to the cybersecurity folks.
yes.
The IT security or the OT security. So OT security is embedded within the operation process, and it should be part of the operations.
I think, John, you brought up a very interesting insight that we've also gathered here at Ensign, is that the threat actors are not typically just after disruption effects. Although there are progressions going towards destruction effects, but we are also definitely seeing that they are interested in operational measurements. So-called your set point values and thresholds. Because exactly as played out in the OSMA attack, they were going beyond the normal set point values. And that is now becoming an area of interest by the adversaries. That's an interesting point that you also highlighted. Maybe to go back to Edgar, so I'm actually a core member in the Geneva Dialogue for Responsible Behaviors in Cyberspace. And the focus this year out of the UN cyber norms is actually on vulnerability management and supply chain risk management, which falls nicely into this topic that we're talking about in OT, threat intelligence, and information sharing. So how do we actually see vulnerability intelligence factor in OT intel? And what are some of the challenges that you have observed, and panelists, please chime in trying to address these two categories of intelligence and risks?
So the two very important ways that vulnerability and vulnerability management apply to OT, you have equipment and you have facilities that have been around for a long time. They have long longevity cycles. Understanding the vulnerabilities is extremely important for two things. Whenever you start having a lot more IT style or security style governance into OT, we find a lot of folks doing risk management for the first time. What does risk management for the first time mean? Well, prioritizing all your risks and then addressing them by order of priority. And that usually has to do with vulnerability. So quickly understanding all my vulnerabilities and ranking them according to impact. Hey, patching this thing would address 30% of the risk. Okay, well, if that's the case, you must do it quickly. So helping folks do risk management in OT a lot of times for the first time is super key, super important. I would say that's number one. And then number two is, vulnerabilities and patching is not always, doable or prioritized. So monitoring exploitation of known vulnerabilities is key. Usually OT attacks take a while. They're not quick. There's a lot of latency time in there. And understanding the very first time that a vulnerability is meant to be exploited, the exploitation of a vulnerability is not normal. So if somebody is trying to exploit a vulnerability, that is almost like a hands down event. Okay, something's happening, somebody's here, and we should address it. So those are the two ways, specifically to OT, that I think vulnerability management needs to be thought about.
I think I'd like to bring on the topic of risk-based instead of compliance-based assessment of OT assets. Now, typically, compliance-based is just a checklist, but risk-based is about understanding your environment and contextualizing it and understanding where potentially it could go wrong, impact your business operations. So I think one of the framework which I'm very interested in is the cyber consequence. Is it cyber engineering or consequence cyber engineering?
Consequence-driven cyber engineering.
Consequence-driven cyber engineering, or CCE. And I've read a book, but maybe Marco, you want to run us through in short? I saw your presentation. There was like eight diagrams there.
Yeah, it's a methodology. It's designed by Idaho National Labs, and it's a 4-phased approach. And it's determining what a high consequence is for your environment, for your company. Imagine trying to determine if an adversary wanted to effectively kill your organization, maybe not necessarily cause injury, impacts, or harm, but just really wants to affect your corporation, even for financial gains. Think about moving the markets around, right? Causing downtime could cause all your clients to go to another company. And so betting on the market could say, we're going to bet on this. So let's impact that. So finding what those high consequence events are is the first priority. And that could be pumping natural gas to a certain area in the world and understanding where that is. And the second piece of that phase is, once you've identified what that high consequence is then really pulling apart those systems to determine what, by digital means, could be invoked or done to be able to get that effect, to cause that high consequence event to happen. So the idea, compared to a 62443 3-2 risk assessment, is instead of going through a methodology of identifying your threats, to identifying your risk and all these other things, we really target that high consequence event. And go from there. And then phase 3 is really the targeting exercises. Now that we've determined the what, and now we've determined the systems of the how, now we're going to actually go in and really get into the vision of, let's get that effect, right? So phase 3 is targeting. And there's a lot of folks in here, I think there's people probably at the pen testing one as well. they enjoy targeting, and that's how you get that effect. And then phase 4 is mitigations. How do we protect against that? And it could be by non-digital means. It could be adding in electromechanical controls, but that is what CCE is. It's cyber-informed engineering, and it's typically performed on brownfield sites.
Yeah, and I think that because I've done risk assessments, and risk is based likelihood or consequence versus impact. Likelihood or probability times the impact, right? So I think this CCE framework will actually, on the impact dimension, you can deep dive down into what goes into the impact to your assets, what impacts your assets more, and you can probably justify the response. The 4 response mitigation is one of the 4 response. So you can choose to accept or reject it, or to transfer. Of course, transferring that would be more difficult, right?
Yeah. It's a great question.
I think to go further with that, there are questions that are coming up on the screen, which is how do we ensure that the information within such communities is robust and valuable? And secondly, how does it get calibrated when in OT, safety is the highest priority and threat does not necessarily factor safety, because you get the threat intel on a particular product, it's just about the product's functions. How it gets applied in a particular operation, in a particular technology environment is going to be quite varied. Whether that triggers safety or not, the intel may not suggest at its first instance. Anyone want to take a stab at addressing that?
Well, I think Ethos is a good start to that, especially being able to bring in that intelligence and that data, and then send that out to whoever's provided that information to get that feedback in to say, okay, this does affect us. It's seen in our environment. We've confirmed that it's not just our facility; it's other facilities. So we need to act, right? And so I think platforms like that are going to be important. Because just because you get a vulnerability of a CVSS of 10 doesn't mean it's going to affect your system, because they're not looking at defense in depth, what your perimeter looks like, if you're behind a data diode, even if the unit is running. There's many factors that you've got to look at, you have to look at.
Yeah.
So, but I think the threat intelligence for this panel is you need that. You need that to be able to act with.
Yeah. So I'll summarize to say basically intel forms the basis and informs you whether there's a potential implication to your environment. And thereafter, you need to go through all the other due diligence actions, whether that's risk assessments, threat analysis, sense making against your assets, how does it apply in your operations, and thereby the safety implications to your operations to be able to then make sense, the sense-making part.
Yes, but there's one thing that is very important, and I'm thinking, especially with things like Ethos and OTCEP and getting all this information, is that high confidence is the term that I like to use. If I'm on the plant side or rail or maritime, if it's good information and it's important and you're going to ask me to act, I need you to be able to tell me with high confidence. That's going to make me want to be able to do what needs to be done in that environment. So that's a key piece to the intelligence, and it's not just fluff.
Yeah.
Because
let me maybe address some of the questions about ethos. I think Mark was talking a lot about high confidence. Ethos address high confidence by knowing how many folks are seeing the same thing that you're seeing.
that helps, right?
That helps quite a bit on the high confidence. How can ethos be integrated into operations? Well, listen, I talked about ethos being launched, being formed. It's being integrated. The ethos client is started to get integrated into products. We require an ethos server. Ethos servers can be run by communities. It can be run by governments. It can be run by coalitions. It could be run by service providers, right? And that makes the threat intelligence transaction or association secure. There's another one. How can threat actors misuse ethos? Well, if you have a community that has decided to organize based on, hey, we all belong to this managed service provider, so this is a closed community, or we all belong to the industry, energy, maritime, whatever coalition we want to run, or maybe the U.S. government, CISA may want to run a ethos server. You can be member of one or many ethos servers, and those communities would provide their own securities. So again, going back to the question, how can Ethos be integrated into operations? It's still early days. Ethos is in the process of being born. We just announced it in the March-April timeframe. We are all building it into our products, all the members of the coalition, and as soon as we have Ethos servers running, then we'll have the Ethos service for that particular community implemented. Ethos is also extremely extensible, right? As I mentioned today, the Ethos server is determining or using clustering to determine relevance, as Marco was saying, and clustering may be only one technique. Clustering determines whether it can go to a human for assessment, for example. But in the future, it may be completely automated, and it may be completely bi-directional. Hey, this behavior was happening, no human was involved. We send that information to an Ethos server. The Ethos server applied machine learning techniques, and it determined it was malicious. It coded it into sticks. It was distributed back to the clients with relevance information and in the form of actionable threat intelligence. That's clearly the natural extension path, but not the case today. I think I covered most of the questions around Ethos.
Yeah, thanks. I led with a little bit on the vulnerability intelligence piece because that's technical information, and to high confidence outcomes of intel sharing, that's one of the main things that OT operators actually pay attention to. But the question that's coming up, and is something that I've observed unique to our immediate region, is that we don't only have the big Western brand names OT products here in this region. We do have emerging East Asian-oriented OT products. How are you seeing that information sharing, the unique communities, whether that OTCEP, Ethos actually help plug that level of visibility? Because most conventional intelligence feeds tend to be leaning a little bit more on the Western technology space.
Yeah, I think you don't know what you don't know.
Yes.
And I think if this, I would say the second tier manufacturers or the third tier manufacturers, companies buy it because it's affordable. But however, the sharing of the information or the threats vulnerabilities may not be so forthcoming because they don't really have an extensive group of people that actually does vulnerability management or research. And they are not necessarily connected, well connected to the industry where researchers will actually share the vulnerability or test their equipment. Because if you look at researchers, they will only test maybe the top tier manufacturers' equipment. But how do you get, and we get this a lot, right? If you go to any of the emerging countries or maybe mature countries, you can buy this equipment, from the shops. And potentially vulnerability management. Now, knowing that is a risk, I think it's the risk that the asset owners and operators needs to understand when they adopt this equipment. Okay, and whether this equipment forms a very integral part of the operation. Is the operations critical? If it's mission critical, then probably it's a risk because there are not a lot of vulnerabilities about that equipment that you're using in your mission critical operations. But if the operation is not so mission critical, then maybe the risk is not so high. You could potentially have safety stocks. If it breaks down, the valve, the seal, it breaks down, you can change it. Transformer breaks down, you can change it. But if it's the turbine, then probably it's a high cost equipment. So probably you need to actually be more careful into what goes inside. What products do you use it, or what spare parts do you use? With that mission critical equipment.
I think automation is fundamental. So automation and machine learning are tools that our enemies are using. So we have to use them and rely on them quite a bit. Nozomi, I'll speak just for Nozomi first.
What do you think?
We have been CVE authority for a long time. We're able to submit CVEs. In the detection market, we've been the #1 submitter of CVEs for a long time. And the way we do this is we're able to see through our asset visibility to what are the brands that our customers are using. And that allows us to prioritize what amount of work we put into the different equipment. And again, we build all sorts of automation so that when equipment gets into our labs, vulnerability discovery is automated and requires as little human touch as possible. Automating vulnerability detection is key to being successful and winning against the bad guys.
My takeaway from the two contributions on this particular topic is essentially kind of buyers beware. You need to do your due diligence to choose the types of products that you put into your environment for your business operations criteria, right? Whether that's critical, mission critical, or they are just, peripheral activities. The second thing is really, I think it's contributions, right? The community and the intelligence that's generated is only as strong as what is input in and then subsequently disseminated. So if there are volunteers or members that actually share unique intelligence about those other types of products that are not necessarily prominent or high popularity or high usage, then that will actually benefit the larger ecosystem. Is that
Yeah, I think one of the things that we do, when members ask for requests for information about vulnerability of certain equipment, we do send it to all the partners and the members as well to ask for information. I think that's the strength of a community. And the larger the community is, there are more people to share that information or intelligence. And before Marco, I hand it to Marco, I think there's another thing that I want to mention is about the assessment or of the different equipment. So I'm actually talking to some industry to come up with like a self-declaration. Vendors actually self-declare whether they comply with CCOP and what controls they comply with, or IEC 62443 or ISO 27001 or NIST cybersecurity framework. So it's not just about compliance that you tick all the boxes in the checklist, the 93 controls of ISO, but you need to show evidence that you comply.
Yes.
And this will help buyers to actually make informed decisions about the type of equipment. But of course, I think coming back to your original question about vulnerability of the not so Western brands in the second line or the third line. So I believe that there's still a gap, a vulnerability gap, because they are not the ones that will not, I don't think they will be willing to declare their compliance.
And it goes a little bit towards the culture that we see in more mature markets, right? For example, CISA offers the known exploited vulnerabilities catalog, which is very helpful in a part of the prioritization process. What do you actually pay attention to, bring it forward for patching versus there are others where CVSS score might be high, but maybe they are not so prioritized, right?
I wanted to chime in because one of the key things is when I was on the asset owner side and then went over to the vendor side when I worked for a large German PLC manufacturer, is that they do have their security hubs internally. And also, if you're a strong client with them, getting good threat intelligence from them, because most of these companies, they may not be from the West. They may be operating in even other countries, whether it's China, Iran, whatever it may be, with their PLCs globally. So getting information and threat intelligence from them and working with the ISACs, because they also partner with the vendors, can give you a much broader view and vision into what they may be seeing as well. And I know the KEVs are great and the CVSS scores are great and all these things, but I really think that we should also champion and partner and collaborate with the vendors, because I know they've got a help desk. I know that they're getting several calls, and I know it does take time for them to push things out, but if you can tie in as an asset owner with some of the vendors and get very close with them and give them some assurance of one-to-one communications, I think that can also go a long way for you.
Yeah, I'd like to hear the panelists' view on the cyber security labeling scheme, because I think that is one of the assurance that buyers, asset owners and operators, when they buy equipment, they can be assured if you have a common criteria, right? For some of the governmental, projects, you need to have a common criteria of a certain level. So I think if more and more asset manufacturers, I think equipment manufacturers join this, then it's to make it easier for buyers, asset owners and operators, when they buy equipment, okay, it meets a certain criteria.
Yeah, and the other thing too is not all patches fix things. We've seen this, I've seen this in the OT space where a patch, even from the vendor, had to get rolled back because after 30 days would create a blue screen of death. That happened on an Emerson Delta V system on a known article base or KBA. And so you have to take time to run these to ground to make sure that you're not going to impact your operations. We've also seen where Microsoft, and it's obviously, you can pick on them because they're predominant in this space, where they've actually signed malicious drivers in a patch update on a patch Tuesday. So you're more secure before the update. So these are the things that we have to, as tactical and practical practitioners of OT, is making sure we vet, verify, validate, and really perform that defense in depth strategy and take all these feeds from the ISACs and the ISALs and from Ethos and make tangible information from it. But as they said earlier, also workshop this with your engineers. The sooner you can bring them to the table and show how this can impact their world in a light way, that's going to be a win for you as an organization, or no matter where you operate, right? No matter where your plants are across the world, that's going to be a game changer for you.
Yeah, I think that's very good advice, and I think asset owners, operators, or organizations can actually benefit a lot from that advice. And we do work with partners, not just equipment manufacturers, but subject matter expertise. Because I think all these brings into the mix of collective defense. So it's not just we know, but it's about the extensive experience and knowledge of people who have been there, who are on the other side, the asset owners and operators, to share that information with the wider community. And that's where we run workshops, we bring in subject matter experts.
And it's kind of
Very
the
important.
neighborhood watch kind of scheme, right, where the community is actually looking out for one another. And as you progress over time, you are deepening your relationship with one another and the trust. Then you say, oh, I remember you said you had this asset the last time, and I've actually seen something else happen in my backyard. So maybe that might be important to you as well. And then you leverage the TLP, but it's really neighbors watching out for one another. So that's a very powerful thing. One of the questions is really about the Intel relevance and how do I make sense, because the IOCs are generated rapidly, right? I'm being an Intel analyst. I know that intelligence has a time of value, right? Last time information of value. And how do you actually balance the use of the timeliness of this intelligence that is shared between the community? I think that's the root question behind that, versus something that you actually take an action to, because by the time you get to have an action taken because of the patch cycles, the schedules, whether you ad hoc it, that might come much later. It won't be immediate per se, especially in the OT environment. Any comments coming out from that? Technical intelligence.
I can start. I mean,
Yeah,
it's
go
a little
ahead.
bit of a self-serving question, but monitoring is key, right? You have to be able to do real-time monitoring. People in OT move a lot slower than people in IT. Intelligence and the speed of intelligence is super important. The more your monitoring vendor knows about bad things that could potentially be happening, the better. You may decide never to patch it because, hey, I don't think it's going to improve my security stance, but you have to be monitoring. We talked a little bit about exploitation of known vulnerabilities, detection of patterns, access control, abnormal behavior. Even if, maybe you have to deal a little bit with some of the false positives. Monitoring is key. I cannot believe we're not monitoring all of our OT networks.
Yeah, I think monitoring is one of the needed defenses. And we know that IOCs are signature-based, and something has happened before. So I think emerging threats, as what Ethos is developing, is one step in the game towards securing the operational technology environment. But there are many, many layers of defense. So I think the key takeaway is not just to focus on a single layer and then you have a false sense of security that you are safe. but it's to continuously reassess and readjust, readapt your environment and your tools, your controls, whether they are robust. Because there's actually a cycle, and it's just as good as the next tool that the attacker invented. Like we heard from Pipe Dream, so
Yes.
then there may be another tool in the future.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just, to dovetail in on Edgar's points and John's points, I think monitoring is very important, especially at the perimeters for your OT. I think it's also quite important to determine where you're going to locate, your sensor technology, who's going to watch it, who's going to monitor it, who's going to react. These are all things, because I see deployments where people throw sensors in locations that don't really make sense on the network. Sometimes I think they do that just to get the job done and get it over and get paid. But the reality is getting that information up to the right people is also important. I've seen success stories taking OT information to an IT SOC. I've also seen unsuccessful stories where that didn't really work out because they didn't know what they were looking at, because it's night and day and different. I can't say how your company operates or if you're even third-partying out your current SOC, but I would be also very cognizant of that in deployment. There's a question there on the very last one is, how does one identify whether an event is caused by operation mishandling and not a cyber attack, which I think is a great question and dovetails into this, is you're going to have that. There's going to be misconfigs. There's going to be accidental tampering. There's going to be even industrial network switches that fail hot. I've seen that as well in the field with a couple of different manufacturers, and it led back to firmware issues, but those could really look like, a cyber attack or a denial of service. And so you might be, transferring or getting up to saying, hey, we're getting attacked, when it could just be a hardware issue.
We take both stance. One stance is, who cares?
Yeah.
Who cares
Yeah.
if it's a cyber attack?
Yeah.
Who cares if it's a switch malfunction? We care about uptime, and regardless of what color, what flavor it is, we need to address it today. We need to address it right now. And then on the other side, you do care after the fact.
Yeah.
If this was malicious, then it's probably not going to be the only one.
Yeah.
A
It's
switch-
the escalation part, because at some point the plant manager is going to say, do I call the FBI or do I call the local authorities?
Yeah.
How do I, because even in the US now, you've got a certain period of time before you have to actually state to the government that, hey, we're under either attack or.
and very soon to the public markets.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
The SEC rules.
So,
That's right.
it's as Edgar said, you want to treat every instance as though it could be, but I wouldn't say that for every incident that you jump to cyber for any.
In fact, our experience is the opposite. It's less than 5% fiber. Usually 95%. It's something, human error, switch, all the things that you mentioned.
Yeah.
For most, not every country, not every player, depending on who you are, but for most folks, is rarely cyber. But number one, who cares? We need to solve it. And number two, for that 5%,
Right.
you want to be able to know right away, know that the second one is coming and that you have obligations after it happened.
Yeah. I'm going to take the last few minutes to do a quick roundup, and I welcome the panelists to add in any points that I've missed out. Largely, we've been speaking about how do we trust the community, how do we ensure that the intel is meaningful and relevant to me. And part of that is really, the community and the neighborhood that you're with, right? So that registration process, that deliberate support with analysts, for example, in OTCEP, you have your own analysts to try and do deeper sense-making and correlation before you disseminate information across. You have competent partners in Ethos, for example. All of them are products and vendors that are very dedicated in this OT space. We talk about a bit about where the intelligence scope really lies. Is it always going to be Western-centric versus the second tier, third tier, as John highlighted? And I say that essentially it's the strength of the community, right? And the willingness to volunteer information that you are aware of. And then progressively, let's hope the ecosystem catches up and they are also part of that sharing process. last but not least, how do you actually contextualize the threat intel to your needs? Really is the risk assessments, the threat modeling, the understanding of your own operations and your asset environment. And then really rationalizing how does safety play in, how does business operations play in. That's where the final wrap-up is. And members of the panel, if you have any additional points to chime in.
I think the big point here is collaboration is key.
Yes.
You're here for a reason. You wouldn't be at this conference if you didn't have an important need to hear and to listen to Edgar and to John. The more collaboration is important moving forward. If you're not already doing things with the ISAC or with Ethos, I highly encourage you do that. I can only speak from what I do over in the United States. I'm an InfraGard sector chief, and I support FBI. And what we have is a very strong maritime community, which includes ports, terminals, even marine terminals for oil and gas, and the ability for them to actually know from asset owner to asset owner through this effective means to collaborate and say, hey, we're seeing this at Port of Houston, we're seeing this at Port of Corpus Christi. This is an event. We need to start rolling this up through the ISACs. We need to have the ISACs roll up and report out to the government. The faster you do that, the faster you'll get intelligible, actionable data.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Getting these various sources of intelligence or information and sharing, disseminating it through community. So there are many communities, and ISACs is one of the oldest community that was created in the US through the presidential directive. But yeah, I mean, regardless of the community that you are in, as long as the objective is actually to make your environment secure, to simplify OT cybersecurity, by rationalizing the approaches that you use to reduce the risk for your organizations.
I will just agree one more time. I think the main dish, if this was a meal, the main dish being served here is collaboration. Threat intelligence and threat intelligence services is all about collaboration. I would just add one maybe side dish, which has to do, maybe not today, but the very near future. Let's use the same tools and capabilities that our adversaries are using, which are automation and machine learning. So, and specifically applied to the world of threat intelligence, discovery, creation, distribution, and demand that from every one of your vendors.
Great, and we are just nice on the dot. I thank you all that have sent in the questions, and join me in thanking the panelists as well. Thank you.
Thank you.